The evening was calm, like all the others in the town. Twilight was slowly covering the street with a thick blanket, where life seemed still, hidden in the shadows of the serene suburbs. John Gill sat at the window of his spacious living room, half hidden by heavy curtains. His gaze drifted unnoticed to the house across the street, where a small room on the second floor was lit up. She had appeared in his life only recently. Emily Wood. Her new home was located in such a way that John could watch her almost every night, especially when she didn't close the curtains. The girl was carefree and didn't even seem to realize that she could be the object of someone's secret attention. Her youth, lightness of movement, and innocent naivety attracted John like a magnet. He did not notice how his innocent observation became a habit. The long working day no longer brought him the same joy, and even his family responsibilities now faded into the background. Only these short, silent moments, when he saw her walking around the room, talking on the phone, or laughing at a program, completely captivated him. At first he tried to justify himself. It was just curiosity, an innocent interest in his new neighbor. But that night something was different. Emily was talking to someone, and even through the distance, John could see an enthusiastic expression on her face. She laughed, and in that moment, he felt something tighten in his chest. Jealousy, a wild, burning feeling he couldn't explain. He felt as if she belonged to him, even though there had never been a word, a touch between them. John leaned back in his chair and dwelt on this feeling. The fact that this feeling was already beginning to control him seemed crazy. "I'm just curious. It's natural," he mentally justified himself. But in that same moment, he also recognized something else. He was interested in more than just friendly, neighborly observation. The phone on the table next to him lit up, notifying him of a new message. A text message from his wife appeared on the screen. She and her children had gone to visit their grandmother in a neighboring town and planned to return the next day. John stared at the text for a moment, but didn't even respond. He was too engrossed in the view from the window. Suddenly, Emily came to the window and their eyes crossed. She noticed him. It only lasted a second, but John felt his heart skip a beat. She seemed to recognize something in him. A hint or intrigue, perhaps? But she looked away and continued talking, pretending nothing had happened. Sitting in his dark room, John was sure that this night was the beginning of something more. John Gill's life seemed to be perfect. He was a successful businessman who owned a network of small businesses in and around the town. People knew him as a businessman, but also a pleasant person to be around. His career was going well, as was his personal life. John had an attractive, caring wife, Sarah, who always stayed in the shadow of his success, supporting him in every endeavor. Their two children, Mark and Anna, studied at the best schools, and evenings at home were spent surrounded by family comfort, gathering around the TV or looking through family photo albums. John had everything he could wish for: a successful career, a loving family, a house in a prestigious neighborhood, everything you could dream of. However, behind this mask of the perfect man was a deep, almost unconscious emptiness. He was missing something inexplicable, something that could not be satisfied by routine family life or business projects. He did not discuss this restlessness, which had been accumulating for years, even with himself, and did not dare to admit that his life needed not just order, but passion and new emotions. When a young girl moved into the house across the street, this emptiness that had been quietly hiding in his soul began to break through. John hadn't intended to let it, but every time he saw her, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Emily Wood had only recently moved to the town. She grew up in the big city, where her life was far from orderly. Her parents divorced when she was only 12. Her mother raised Emily on her own, and although they always tried to maintain a warm relationship, the girl quickly became independent, used to solving problems without help. Her close friends described her as cheerful and somewhat frivolous, but this playful shell hid a real need for stability and peace, which she lacked so much in her childhood. After entering university, Emily decided to leave her parents' home and rent a house in a small, quiet town to finally find her rhythm, be alone with her thoughts, and perhaps rethink her life. She chose this neighborhood by chance. It seemed quiet and peaceful, perfect for escaping from the bustling city life. Moving to the new house was the beginning of a new phase for Emily. She dreamed of freedom, of living without restrictions and other people's expectations. Now she was working part-time at a local coffee shop, trying to combine her work with her studies and exploring her new city. She often took walks in the evenings, enjoying the peace and quiet that was so different from the life she had left behind. Living in her new home really gave her the sense of independence she had been craving, and her new neighbor, John, at first seemed like a nice and respectable man who greeted her kindly whenever they happened to cross paths. She felt something reliable, even paternal about him, which further fueled her sense of calm. He was a symbol of stability for her, the kind of stability she lacked as a child. However, John saw something completely different in their occasional meetings and correspondence. He did not perceive Emily as a neighbor or an acquaintance. His eyes lingered on her longer than he would have liked. Her lightness, her youth seemed to him to be something unattainable, which excited his imagination. She brought into his life something that had been missing for years: novelty, risk, and an unusual freedom of feeling. But where Emily saw only light flirtation, he saw a meaning that inexorably attracted him, regardless of his status, age, or understanding of the boundaries of what was permissible. For John, her presence became a source of passion that he could not control, and although their lives seemed completely different, they both subconsciously sought to fill the gaps left by the past. A week after their first chance meeting in a coffee shop, John and Emily bumped into each other again, by accident, in a parking lot near a store. It didn't seem like a coincidence anymore, and they both knew it, even though they tried to pretend otherwise. The tone of their conversation remained light, but there was something else in their eyes, a secret game that they both seemed to have started by accident. Later, John decided to take the first step that would change the course of events. Late at night, when the family was already asleep, he sat down at his laptop and wrote a message without revealing his name. In his text, he left a hint that the message was random, addressed to a girl he didn't know, whom he just wanted to congratulate on her new life in this town. The message was light and innocent, but it subtly encoded a real admiration. "Congratulations on your new beginning in our town. Someone sincerely wishes you to find what you are looking for here." Emily quickly responded, a little surprised but also intrigued. "I wonder how you know I'm looking for something." From that moment on, their communication took off. They exchanged messages every night when John made sure his wife and children were asleep. Emily, lying in her bed, replied to his mysterious texts, enjoying this hidden game, although she did not know who started it. Their conversations turned into a kind of ritual, and over time, the tone of their correspondence became more and more open. John shared with her thoughts about his life that he could never tell his wife, and Emily, who felt a lack of intimacy and understanding, opened up to him, telling him about her fears and unfinished dreams. Sometimes their words were just hints of something more, of hidden feelings that they were both still afraid to name. In one of their conversations, John confessed, "You brought something into my life that I never thought I would feel again." Emily didn't respond right away, her hands shaking as she wrote, "And what is that?" "The feeling of being alive," he wrote back. These words might have sounded insincere coming from another man, but Emily caught the truth in them, which penetrated her soul. However, even though their correspondence remained secret, John was losing control of himself more and more. During the day, he tried to keep up the mask of a caring father and loving husband, but inside he felt his life falling apart. So far he had managed to keep his family and his obsession separate, but with each passing day, the line was becoming more and more blurred. Emily also began to realize that their communication was going too far, but she was fascinated by the way this invisible thread connected her to John. He became someone special to her, something more than just a mysterious friend. She was lonely in her new life, and his attention gave her the sense of importance she had grown accustomed to as a child. One evening, Emily stayed home, not going for a walk or to a coffee shop. She sat by the window in her room, drinking wine and thinking about John. Although she tried not to develop these feelings, something new had already begun in her heart, a dangerous curiosity about this man who was many years older than she was, but seemed to understand her better than anyone else. John also spent that evening alone, sitting at his office window looking out at Emily's house, which glowed in the evening twilight. He felt that he had crossed a line from which there was no return. And although he knew how dangerous his feelings were, he couldn't stop himself. Their secret grew like a shadow hidden from prying eyes. They became more and more entangled in this forbidden connection, which reminded them of how easily a hobby can turn into an obsession. From the night their conversation on the next street first went beyond mere flirting, John and Emily could no longer contain their feelings. Their meetings became regular. They found ways to see each other, despite all the risks, and each time this forbidden game became even more intense. Their secret date in a small cafe in the far end of town, where they were not afraid to meet people they knew, was the first step towards breaking the unspoken rules. They sat at a table in the corner where they could talk quietly and without witnesses. At first, John was stiff, trying to keep his distance, but Emily's very presence relaxed him. Her young lightness and open smile erased all barriers. "Why do you look at me so often?" she asked, brushing a strand of hair away from her face, her eyes sparkling with curiosity. John smiled, but his gaze was serious. He didn't answer right away, trying to find the words to explain this strange, contradictory feeling inside him. "Because you're what I'm missing," he finally admitted, feeling the words tear down the wall he had been building for so long. Emily tilted her head, looking at him with a small smile. She loved to feel his attention and attraction, manifested in his every movement, in his eyes, in the way his voice became lower and softer when they were alone. After that meeting, their lives changed. They began meeting regularly, in quiet places where their secret glances and embraces could go unnoticed. At first, they were just cautious walks, short conversations in the park on the next street. But with each meeting, their conversations became more and more open, and the feeling that united them became more and more unrestrained. One evening they spent in a room in a small hotel outside the city, where they had come under the guise of work. The silence of the room, hung with heavy curtains, seemed to create a separate world where they could be only themselves. It was their territory, where there were no rules, no duties, no morals. Emily felt safe and secure around him, and although she realized that their connection was far from normal, it only fueled her interest. John, too, was captivated by this illusion. He stopped thinking about the consequences and allowed himself to enjoy every moment he spent with Emily. He liked the way she talked about her dreams, the small things that made her happy. All of this was new and extremely attractive to him. Emily gave him a sense of youth and freedom that had long been alien to him. However, their trysts could not remain secret forever. John lived in constant fear that someone would find out about their relationship. Every time he returned home, he felt remorseful, but each time he justified himself by thinking that he deserved this brief happiness that he missed so much. Emily, on the other hand, began to realize that their relationship could be a disaster. She was curious about John's life, but she didn't want to look too deeply into his reality. She loved his attention, the world he opened up for her, but something inside her warned her. She began to feel a little afraid, because their affair was turning into an addiction that was impossible to break free from. Meanwhile, John was becoming more and more distant from his family. He started coming home later, shirking family responsibilities, becoming irritable and alienated. His wife, Sarah, noticed the changes but did not know how to explain his behavior. John was torn between two realities, unable to return to his normal life, and at the same time afraid that his secret would be revealed. Each new meeting with Emily brought him a sense of happiness, but at the same time it plunged him into an abyss from which he realized he could not escape. He had made a choice that now ruled his life. Each new day brought more anxiety to John. His romance with Emily, which at first had seemed inexplicably sweet and exciting, had now turned into a burden hanging over his life. Whenever he was with her, he felt more alive than ever. But when he returned home to his wife and children, this reality felt like a trap. It seemed as if his secret was about to surface. Emily, who had initially enjoyed the forbidden liaison, began to feel differently as well. Her feelings for John grew stronger, developing into something more than just passion. She began to be jealous of his wife, of his family life, which he had never dared to give up completely. John remained out of her reach at a time when she was becoming more and more attached to him. She felt that she deserved more than to be his secret. How much longer are we going to hide? She asked one day when they met on the outskirts of town to spend time together again. Her eyes were serious, her face full of determination. I'm tired of this hiding, John. I want you to be with me openly. John looked away, feeling a cold fear that chilled him to the bone. He tried to pretend that the question didn't exist, but Emily wasn't going to stay silent. Emily, you know that's impossible, he said quietly, trying to control his voice. I have a family, a responsibility to them. I can't just destroy everything I've built over the years. So I'm just an adventure for you, a temporary diversion. Her voice was sharp, tears glistening in her eyes. I want to be with you, John, and I'm not going to live in the shadows anymore. These words knocked him off balance. He realized that Emily was not satisfied with being a secret lover. She wanted more: openness, stability, a life with him that he could not give her. It seemed to him that she was beginning to become a threat that could destroy his entire life. For the first time in their romance, he felt that this connection could be the beginning of the end for him. You don't understand how dangerous this is, John said quietly, avoiding her gaze. If someone finds out, it could ruin not only my life, but yours as well. Isn't that worth it? If we love each other, we should be together. She moved closer to him, took his hand. Her eyes shone with a determination he had never seen before. John felt panic grip him. Emily's words seemed like a threat. She was ready to act, despite all the risks. His heart was beating faster, and he was having trouble breathing. Emily, we need to stop, he finally said, feeling the words ringing in the air like a sentence. We've gone too far. Stop? Are you serious? Her voice trembled with indignation and pain. After everything we've been through? You want to leave me and go back to your family like nothing ever happened? His silence was the answer. Emily felt her disappointment and anger merge into an uncontrollable flood of emotions. She took a step back, looking at him with an expression that was both desperate and furious. You're going to regret this, John, she whispered, brushing away a tear. If I can't have you, then maybe it's better that everyone knows about us. It sounded like a threat. John felt the ground slipping away from under his feet. He realized that Emily was ready for anything, and now she could become his greatest enemy. Their affair was no longer a passionate connection that gave him freedom. Now it became a dangerous trap from which it might be impossible to escape. When Emily left, John was left alone, feeling despair. It seemed to him that this story could only end in disaster, and now that their secret was threatening to come out, his life, reputation, and even his safety were at risk. John woke up in the middle of the night to a phone message. Emily had sent him a short message that almost seemed like a joke, but it carried a barely contained threat. I'll tell you everything at the party tomorrow. It's time to give you a choice. John stared at the screen for a long time, not believing his eyes. His blood froze in his veins. If Emily revealed their relationship, everything he had built, his reputation, his career, his family, would be destroyed. She held his life in her hands and was willing to destroy it for the sake of being together. Confused and at the same time filled with rage, he tried to justify his outrage that she had chosen to destroy his life, his stability, and disregarded all her warnings. The next evening, John showed up at a party held at the estate of one of their mutual friends. He knew Emily would be there and was convinced that her threat was real. He looked around the crowd, searching for her face, and at the same time felt his heart beating wildly. The mixed feelings of fear and rage turned into one thing: panic. He realized he had to stop her before she could do what she was planning. Finally, John saw her. Emily was standing at the end of the hallway, talking to several guests. He saw her look at him and smile slightly, as if disregarding his fear. She knew he couldn't do anything to stop her. That look was the last straw that completely destroyed his self-control. John approached her, taking her around a corner where no one could hear them. He could feel his hands trembling with tension. "You can't do this, Emily," he hissed, looking into her eyes with desperation and anger. "Don't you deserve it?" she replied coldly. "I don't want to be your secret anymore, John. I'm tired of it. Either we're together or—" She paused, and a challenge appeared in her eyes. "Or I'll tell you everything right now." At that moment, something broke in John. The surge of emotions that swept over him was so powerful that he could no longer control himself. His hands reached out to her. He felt rage raging in his chest, his breathing becoming labored and ragged. He barely remembered how it happened. Everything was a blur. Emily pulled away, trying to get out of his arms, but John wouldn't let her. Their footsteps echoed in the empty corridor, and suddenly they were on the balcony. In a fit of panic and rage, John pushed her away without even realizing what he was doing. Emily slipped on the edge of the balcony, lost her balance, and the frightened look in her eyes momentarily shattered his self-confidence. But it was too late. Her body fell down, shattering the silence of the night air with a soft scream that died away as suddenly as it had begun. John stood motionless, his breathing labored and his heart nearly pounding out of his chest. He looked down at the motionless figure of Emily lying on the ground below. The realization of what he had just done sent a cold wave of fear through him. But a moment later, another thought began to form in his mind. He had to cover his tracks. If he didn't hide the evidence, all would be lost. He quickly returned to the party, feigning shock and dismay when one of the guests approached him, saying that someone had fallen from the balcony. He pretended not to know anything, trying to act as natural as possible. He quickly left the house with the others without attracting too much attention. At home, he carefully considered every step. He deleted all his messages, erased any trace of communication with Emily. He checked every phone call, every message that could have exposed their connection. Knowing how important it was to maintain his flawless image, John devised a strategy that would make the police think it was an accident. However, even though he realized that he had destroyed all the evidence, John could not get rid of the burden that lay on his soul. He realized that in order to save his life, he had crossed a line that he would never be able to cross again. Emily Wood's body was found the next morning, when the first witnesses gathered in the yard under the balcony where she had fallen. The police were called by the owner of the house, who was shocked that his party had ended in tragedy. Local detective Nora Hayes, known in the town for her unwavering intuition and ability to pay attention to the smallest details that went unnoticed by others, arrived at the scene. Nora carefully examined the scene of Emily's fall, her gaze focused and cold. Her years of experience told her that not all accidents are truly accidental. The girl's body was lying unnaturally, and her face was frozen with a look of fright that seemed unusual for an accidental tragedy. "Are there any witnesses?" she asked, looking around at the assembled guests. "No one saw it happen," one of the officers replied. However, Nora felt that something was wrong. She walked over to the balcony where Emily had fallen and carefully examined the railing, paying attention to the smallest details. In her experience, there were no accidents, only traces that could tell a story. She noticed subtle scratches on the metal railing, as if someone had tried to hold on. "Interesting," she thought, leaning closer to take a closer look. Her experience told her that such scratches were not indicative of an accident, but rather of a struggle or attempt to escape. Nora looked around the room next to the balcony. Everything seemed to be in place, as if nothing had been disturbed. However, her attention was drawn to the floor near the balcony door. On the smooth surface were several small particles of soil left by shoes, and in one place there was a small, almost imperceptible drop that could be blood or other liquid. She ordered additional analysis for prints and began questioning the guests, observing their reactions. Each of them gave similar testimony. Emily had been looking nervous lately, and almost everyone had seen her with a man with whom she was having an emotional conversation. No one could say who the man was, but several people mentioned that he was very reserved and tried to avoid unnecessary attention. This information caught Nora's attention. She realized that the normal appearance of respectable people can often hide dark secrets that leave only minor traces. John Hill, whose name was mentioned by several guests, was among those who left the party immediately after the incident. John had a reputation as a successful entrepreneur and a model family man whose perfect life seemed untouchable. However, Nora was alarmed by the fact that his reaction to the tragedy was very reserved, as if he already knew everything and was just trying not to draw too much attention to himself. The next day, Nora went to see John to ask him some questions. She hadn't told him in advance to avoid any prepared answers. and she noticed that his reserved demeanor barely concealed his tension. "Mr. Hill, I need to talk to you about the events of last night," she said, watching his reaction carefully. John tensed slightly, but quickly composed himself and answered, "Yes, Emily and I spoke briefly. She was upset about something, but I don't think it was anything important." Nora nodded, but her gaze remained fixed directly on him. She sensed the discrepancy between his words and his expression, the nervousness he was trying to hide. "You probably know that accidents like this need to be thoroughly investigated," Nora said. "We can't rule out any possibility, even if it was just an accident. Some witnesses saw you and Emily having a rather intense conversation. Is there anything you'd like to add?" John tensed again. "No, we didn't have anything like that. Just a normal conversation, about familiar topics. She was upset, but nothing more." Nora stared at his face, trying to understand what lay behind his coolness. Something in his behavior seemed too deliberate, and she was sure of it. John was hiding more than he was willing to say. Her experience told her that little things like his reserved tone and nervousness could be the key to solving this mysterious case. The detective felt that there was a trail that was worth pursuing further. Now Nora decided to focus on every little detail, every unexpected gesture, and every bystander. She knew that it was often the smallest details that hid the truth, and this case was beginning to remind her of a dangerous maze. Detective Nora Hayes spent the next few days analyzing the testimony in detail and searching for clues that could shed light on Emily's mysterious death. Her intuition told her that things were not so simple, and that there was something much deeper than an ordinary accident behind this tragedy. Again and again, she returned to the notes from John Hill's interrogation. His answers sounded too polished, and his reserved manner hid a subtle tension that Nora could see right away. She decided to start by looking into his relationship with Emily, which could have left a trail even if he had tried to erase all evidence. Nora scrutinized Emily's phone records and messengers. At first, all her contacts seemed normal, typical of a young girl. However, among the numerous messages, she found several mysterious text messages sent from a hidden number. Their tone was a hint of a relationship that Emily didn't seem to want to talk about openly. The messages were short, cautious, and at times contained only hints of the emotions she was feeling. "Miss you," was one such message, written, Nora assumed, in response to correspondence that Emily had tried to keep private. This trail led Nora to one important detail. She decided to check John's phone records, which, although partially cleared, still contained some contacts with unknown numbers that matched those used by Emily. She sent a request for a full printout of the messages, hoping to find more evidence that could confirm her suspicions. In addition, Nora began to pay attention to the small details left at the scene of Emily's fall. Analyzing the scratches on the balcony railing confirmed her hunch. They were left fresh, as if someone had tried to hold on, desperate for support. "This doesn't look like an accidental fall," she told her colleague who was helping with the investigation. The colleague nodded, agreeing that the scratches were consistent with a struggle. But who was there with her that night? Meanwhile, one of the party workers, a young waiter, contacted Nora, reporting some strange details he had noticed that night. According to him, he saw John and Emily leave the room for the balcony, and their conversation seemed tense. He also noted that he noticed a brief moment when Emily looked frightened, as if she was trying to run away. The waiter recalled how John seemed to try to hide his condition when he returned to the other guests after Emily's fall. This testimony added further suspicion to John's image. Nora realized that the story of a forbidden affair that led to tragedy was unfolding before her. She now had reason to believe that John had not only an acquaintance with Emily, but also a relationship that he wanted to hide at all costs. John noticed how often the police were contacting him and felt his fear begin to turn into panic. He realized that Nora wasn't going to stop and that her suspicions were only growing. He tried to keep up his usual routine, but nervousness became his constant companion. Small details that he could not hide began to expose him, as if slowly tightening the noose around his neck. Every new request from Nora, every question she asked, pushed him into more and more panic. He began to make mistakes that Nora noticed immediately. His answers became less convincing, and his restraint disappeared under the pressure of guilt and fear. A few days after the conversation with the waiter, Nora received the results of the DNA analysis from the balcony floor. It turned out that there was blood on the floor that matched Emily's DNA. This was evidence of a struggle between her and John before she fell. Nora now had a key piece of evidence that confirmed her hunch. She realized that John had tried to cover up the crime as an accident, but even the smallest traces, blood, scratches, messages, began to form a coherent picture. She no longer had any doubt that he was involved in Emily's death, and now she had the evidence in her hands to bring him to justice. Nora went to John with a warrant for his interrogation and subsequent detention. Justice had to be done, and this time, even the most skillful attempts to cover their tracks could not hide the truth. When Detective Nora Hayes showed up at John Hill's doorstep with the detention order, he already knew that his plan had failed. The fear and paranoia that had accompanied him in recent weeks had now consumed him completely. He faced Nora with the same restraint that had once helped him hide his guilt, but this time her gaze was unwavering. "Mr. Hill," she said calmly, "I'm here to have a conversation that will bring this matter to a conclusion. It's time for the truth to come out." John tried to keep his cool, but Nora's words were a verdict for him. His world, his successful business, his family, his reputation as a model husband, crumbled before his eyes. He tried to justify himself, pretending that everything that had happened was just an unfortunate accident. But Nora listened patiently, allowing him to get even more confused in his testimony. Eventually, unable to stand the tension, John confessed. His confession was chaotic, lacking logic or reasoning, only desperation and a sense of inevitable defeat. He described their relationship, his attempt to hold on to Emily when she decided to expose their affair, and the accidental fight on the balcony that ended in tragedy. The case was brought to court, and John Gill was charged with murder. The news of his arrest shocked the town, which had always seen him as a model citizen and loving father. Nora was the main witness, presenting evidence that exposed his crime: phone records, scratches on the handrail, a waiter's testimony, and DNA results. Her work on the investigation provided a compelling case that left no doubt about John's guilt. At the trial, he sat with his head down, listening to the testimony and not attempting to object. His once respectable image disappeared, crushed by the weight of his own mistakes and fatal decisions. His entire career, his achievements, even his connection to his family now seemed futile as the judge pronounced his sentence of 20 years in prison. For John Gill's family, his arrest was a real blow that turned their lives upside down. Sarah, his wife, learned about the accusations from neighbors before she even received confirmation from the police. In her shock, she tried to find at least some solace in the idea that it was all a mistake, that John could not have been capable of such a thing. But when the news revealed all the details, the affair with her neighbor, the conflict on the balcony, and Emily's death, her world completely crumbled. Sarah felt betrayed, humiliated, and destroyed. The man she thought was her loyal partner revealed himself to her as a completely different person, hiding a dark side she had never known. It was hard for her to accept that John, for whom she had given her life and raised her children, was not only hiding his infidelity from her, but was also capable of committing a crime. At first, Sarah could not figure out what to do next. She felt lost and alone. The children were also suffering, especially her eldest son, Mark, who was close to his father and had always seen him as a role model. Now he was feeling angry and ashamed, not knowing how to perceive the fact that his father was involved in a murder case. His sister Anna, who was younger, could not fully comprehend the full extent of the tragedy, but she could feel the tension and pain that had affected her family. Sarah decided to meet John in prison to see him one last time and get answers to her questions. The meeting was difficult. John looked broken. He tried to justify his actions, explaining everything as a mistake, a fit of passion. But these words could not restore the lost trust and love. Sarah looked at him with alienation, realizing that the man she had known for so many years was just an illusion. "I don't recognize you, John," she said, looking him straight in the eye, "and I can't forgive what you did to our family." After this meeting, she decided to distance herself from him. It was important to her to provide stability for her children, to help them survive this blow and rebuild their lives. Sarah realized that she would have to build a new reality where John would no longer be there. In the small town, everything returned to normal, but the case of John and Emily remained a deep scar in the memory of the locals. This story reminded them that the mask of ordinary everyday life can hide the darkest secrets, and a peaceful life can be just an illusion, ready to crumble under the influence of an insatiable human obsession.